Dr. Dorian is a senior lecturer at Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, University of Edinburgh. He has completed his MArch, PhD by Design, MSc in Architecture and Urban Design, MSc in Reflective Design Practices. It's interesting, Mumbai has been studied by many people from different perspectives, and today we are going to look at one more perspective. And Dr. Dorian is going to talk about urban design considered as a product of ecosophy, a philosophy of three intersecting ecologies, primarily the environment, human relations, and human subjectivity. And that's is a research into the city of Mumbai, which is what he is going to present. This talk is particularly organized by Faculty of Architecture Alumni Association, CEPT University. May I welcome Dr. Dorian? Please come forward.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Suresh, thank you very much for initiating the invitation. I'm Manushe, who was a PhD student who came to visit me in Edinburgh and enticed me to come to Ahmedabad. So between Manushe and Suresh Patel, I've managed to get here and delighted to be here. So today I'm going to give a lecture, a presentation in 4 parts. The first part will include a 10-minute film. So actually, it will be about 15 minutes in total, and the film is going to act as a sort of summary of the methods and methodology that my studio promotes, and to a certain extent it encases everything that we're going to do in the next 3 parts. It should be a very easy experience, that 10-minute film. It won't be too heavy. It's very descriptive. So you can switch off after 15 minutes and leave it at that, or you can follow me into the next 3/4 of the presentation. The next part will be dense theory. So maybe for another 10, 15 minutes, I'll give you some dense theory so that you can understand some of the principles at play. Then maybe I'll spend another 5, 10 minutes talking about Bombay, a particular perspective on Bombay. And then for the remainder, I will go in and show you some examples of work from the studio. And those examples will be in still images, not the movie, but they refer back to that movie. And I will conclude with the exact same way that I start, through an introduction of some of the terms and some of the main points. So hopefully, in this 4/4 of the presentation, you have options to switch in and out, come and go, and take it at whatever level you'd like to take it. And hopefully, therefore, even for non-architects, non-urban designers, there'll be something there. For non-political philosophers, there'll be something there. But if you wish to go into even more detail, I'd be delighted to take questions afterwards. Okay, so the main title, Ecosophic Urbanism, 2 terms. And I'm going to try and elaborate something about each of them, something about ecosophic and something about urbanism. But I have 3 subtitles: the loving metropolitan landscape, architecture, landscape, and the ecosophic object, and parasituation. Each of these 3 subtitles explains something of ecosophy, and I'm going to use these terms to try and elaborate certain principles. I will not give you a full philosophy, that would be impossible in this kind of time, but hopefully you'll get something that comes through those terms and something very fundamentally important to the thinking about urbanism on these terms. So I'm going to invoke in the second part of the presentation Patrick Geddes, Andrea Branzi, and Ungers, and they will help me elaborate some principles, some paradigms, if you like, urban paradigms, which I call evolutionary urbanism, enzymatic urbanism, and polycentric urbanism, and they're all key paradigms to the paradigm that I'm going to call ecosophic urbanism. These are only three of a few, many, but I think these are three key theories of urbanism that I think I would like to highlight a little for you today. On the political philosophical front, I'm going to talk about Giorgio Agamben, Felix Guattari, and Michel Serres. And I'll use each of these terms, Agamben to talk about the metropolitan landscape, Guattari to talk about the ecosophic object, a very abstract term I understand, but I'll try and give you something to do with it. And Michel Serres, the parasite, which gives me the definition of parasituation. Now, before I go into this 10-minute film, I'm going to elaborate 10 points. This is, again, only 10 points, but there could be more points, but I wanted to lay them out for you so that you can understand something of some key principles which explains something of the methodology for ecosophy, but particularly as architects and urban designers. And I think if all we get is something of these 10 points, that would be enough, because that's really critical. And that's the slide I'm going to end on again, so hopefully you'll understand something of these points throughout the lecture. Okay, so the first point. Ecosophic urbanism works as an agency of skilled design practice. I want to say first and foremost, what I do as both a practitioner and an academic is I do research by design and design as research. So design is central to all the outputs that you're about to see. So even when I'm writing, I'm thinking and practicing design, and I'm using my skills as an architect, a spatial practitioner, to think about the space of political philosophy and the space within which political philosophy takes place. So, point one, design practice. Second point, ecosophic urbanism places design practice at the heart of urban planning. And so when we have urban planners preparing the local plan, we see our version of the local plan. We don't want to necessarily replace the local plan. We want to place a local plan alongside the existing local plan. And we see that as a result of local practices, but with an international outlook. So ecosophic urbanism develops infrastructures from within and between ecologies. So what we call an ecology, we can talk about more or less any network that exists within a city as an ecology. We can talk about the making of cotton, we can talk about the natural processes driven by the environment, be it the monsoon. All of these are ecologies, and we have to be particularly sensitive to them as ecologies. So ecosophic urbanism does not consider ecology to be the domain of a nature-loving minority. I'm really speaking about a critique of sustainability here. Sustainability we admire in ecosophy, but there's a particular kind of practice in sustainability that promotes everything through the commodification of sustainability. So we have terms, I'm sure you have them here too, called ecological bling, which has all the apparatuses of ecology, but not necessarily anything fundamentally to do with ecology. So ecology is an ecosophic principle for all dwelling and is, in fact, the foundation of economy. The term ecosophy, eco, comes from the Greek oikos, which means dwelling. So even economy means the management of dwelling. It means the sensible management of dwelling. So the sophy, the wisdom of ecosophy, is simply the wisdom of dwelling. This is what ecosophic urbanism is. It is the wisdom of dwelling as a foundation principle to thinking about urbanism. Now, of course, dwelling is multifaceted, and I'll go into some of that. Ecosophic urbanism, point 5, develops multiple sites of production new microsocial and micro-political practices. In fact, one might say, given the way we are today with our divisions between the practices of global capitalism, integrated world capitalism, and what we actually do on the ground as everyday dwellers of the city, there is a huge gulf. So maybe one of the things that we in architecture, in urban design can do most readily is to design at the micro-social and micro-political level, and through networking these agencies together, they grow, and perhaps they can offer some form of at least resistance, perhaps slowing down those fast global practices that are not operating to ecosophic principles and certainly not operating to ecological principles. Capital doesn't necessarily equate to ecology, even though its foundations are in ecology. So, ecosophic urbanism develops and encourages new solidarities, develops a new gentleness, and develops new aesthetic and new analytic practices, some of which you'll see in this film in a moment. Ecosophic urbanism proposes and develops processes of heterogenesis. So what we really mean by that is lots of different sites of creative practice. So rather than projects that conform to the same formal principles, ecosophic urbanism considers heterology as appropriate, and homology is not, i.e. things which are made the same, is not to be disregarded. It is just simply that we recognize that in a political situation, a true political situation, we have disagreements, perhaps more than we have agreements, and it's strange how our development principles are based on agreeing rather than disagreeing. So we're looking for strategies of how to promote and develop affirmative disagreements, where disagreements are seen as creative and not necessarily negative. So ecosophic urbanism develops many ways, heterologies, to enable the singular, exceptional and rare to coexist with a state structure, but while simultaneously encouraging the state structure to be the least burdensome as possible. Okay, so there are 10 points which are inbuilt into this idea of ecosophic urbanism, this complex set of methods and methodologies that we promote as ecosophic urbanism. So maybe, if I'm right, I think Okay, so hopefully that gives you some sort of sense of the gentleness that we're promoting. To maybe begin the next part and speak a little bit of theory, as a prelude, let me just remind you a few things, that design is the heart of what we do. It's a spatial practice, and what we are trying to encourage is that urban planning is not just simply a 2D bureaucratic practice, or even just a simply 3D volumetric practice or zoning practice, and it's not really either a capital-led practice in the abstract of how people live and how people dwell. It's also about spaces of production, and it seems to us that we see so much of urban design that is really devoid of any sense of spaces of production. I mean, this is a typical master plan, urban design. This is for East Bombay. And what's particularly obvious about this, I think, is that it has no idea of scale, of people, of practices, of production. This tower here, I think, is 1.5 miles high in this drawing. That's just ridiculous. You know, buildings just don't go that high. Even the highest building in the world isn't that high. There's an extraordinary conceit about this, and of course, it's always using terms like this. Special purpose project site, mixed use building. I mean, this building is the size of the Mida, of the Mobile Mida. This isn't a building. This is some image of a building that has no text in the building. And the various things that we see here, Trans-Harbour, commercials, old city, depot. Now, we see these kind of programs all the time in master plans. And what, of course, they are incentives to real estate developers. They're not anything to do with planning. But actually, these kind of plans are influencing urban planning. And these are the kind of drawings that are used to convince government quangos and the like to commit to the release of land and the displacement of many residents. So we're slightly against that. I mean, this is an aerial photograph of Bombay that you probably recognise, and it's only just this tiny little bit here. But it kind of gives you an idea of how tall the thing is. We know how tall we are. This is an absurdity. Yeah? So I might as well say, I don't like to say I'm against anything, because I tend to be very optimistic and affirmative, but I think we're against that. Okay. Now, a little point. I don't know if you know this political philosopher, Jacques Rancière. The simple point I want to make there is that there are really smart philosophers out there that have been working in ways to try and encourage all of us in other fields, other disciplines, to understand the affirmative operations of things like dissensus, which we're often seen told by politicians is something negative, something obstructive, and they try to convince us that there is such a thing as consensus. Well, anyway, I'm just pointing out there is this very sound philosophy available, and he talks about, he's very critical of the idea of aestheticizing politics and the politics of aesthetics being used within some sort of apparatus of consensus. And our project, as I said, is really elaborating from an understanding of the creative potential in dissensus, in dissent. And I put this one quote by Immanuel Kant here, foundation stone of the Western Enlightenment. I think it has resonance still today. where he says, enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. So we know that there are people out there that are really nervous about things they don't know anything about, and rather than actually take on the challenge of getting to know things and getting into the difficulty of things, they take the easy option, foreclose questions, close doors, don't go into the corridors, don't move into other spaces of difference. So, and he's writing this in the mid-18th century, and it's still going on, even though this was one of the foundation stones of enlightenment. So, I now just put in this other warning from Gregory Bateson, who reminds us that, you know, we have a conceit as human beings that we think ourselves the smartest being on earth, and we're in danger of engaging in projects which we think are extending our life on this planet, but actually are foreclosing our life. So he makes this very clear point that a wild population of any species is the evolutionary unit par excellence. This is the one that survives best, not the homologous unit, but the unit which is composed of many differences. The science of evolution, the patterns of evolution prove this to us, and it's curious that we know this, yet are still promoting Bombay as a city, for example, as I showed in the last image, as a city just like any city across the planet, and we forget, you know, Bombay, India, it's on the tropics, it's got a very different kind of environmental condition, and yet the buildings that are going up in the business districts in Bombay look like the same buildings in China, the same buildings in Korea, New York, Europe, etc., etc. It's a very strange phenomenon that we're not getting specificity into our conversations. So, a little thought about Bombay then. So this drawing on the right, this map, all the purple is inhabitation, all the green is the stuff where plants still dominate. Now, of course, that's not what, that's the current image, that's not what it always looked like. And this ever-increasing population with green being ever marginalized is potentially a problem, but it's not terribly different from many cities at certain points in its growth. And this image, which I find extraordinary, I took this myself on my first visit to Bombay, just at the tail end of the monsoon season. It was bright sunshine 1 minute, and about 2 minutes later, this cloud appears and I get drenched to the skin. There is an abundance of water at certain times of the year in Bombay. It's astonishing that it's in short supply. And this obviously is to do with water management systems. But we also know that Bombay has developed very complex and interesting systems for water. Anyway, I'm just pointing out here that the environment of Bombay, despite the fact this image here presents it as this immense, dense, man-made thing, actually there's an awful lot of the environment which is still intrinsically environmental. The island is, the peninsula is flat, essentially. If the sea level changes just a tiny little, much of this will be under flood. It has happened in the past, it will happen again. So there is a conceit that this landscape, it's amazing that historically, I can imagine when you were in Bombay, maybe even just 30 years ago, you would always be aware of the sea, whereas now it's amazing that at times you can imagine the sea has nothing to do with Bombay. It has absolutely everything to do with Bombay, and it's weather cycles and so on and so forth. So that environment creates a very specific understanding of context. So what I'm going to do now, I hope, is okay. I'm going to go into a bit of theory. I'm going to elaborate these 6 points. Okay, so the first point, Giorgio Agamben. There are only 3 maybe I'll sit here, points that I want to elaborate here. So the first point is to do with the notion of metropolis. The metropolitan landscape has become a term, I don't know if it's the same in India, but if we talk about the metropolitan city in the UK, we talk about the area of the city that is governed by the city. We talk about a political condition. It's the politics. So the metropolitan means something under governance. Agamben goes back and philosophically deconstructs that term and takes us back to the first colony, the mother city, the first metropolis, Athens, and its colonies in present-day Turkey. But even then, they still had this idea built into this notion of the metropolis, the mother city, metropolis, the polis, and mother, these two terms coming together. So there is an issue of care. Now, to underline that value of care, I insert the loving before metropolitan, so that we never forget that when we mean metropolitan, we have to be very caring. In the term apparatus, that Agamben also gives us, so if we were to read our Marx, we would talk about apparatus as being this term of governmentality, but we can talk about apparatus in many different ways too. And Agamben wants us to think of the apparatus of community, the apparatus of government, and the apparatus of individuality. And it's the intersection between these three apparatuses to remind ourselves that we are responsible for our own dispositions, and our own disposition towards individuality, our own disposition towards community, and our own disposition towards government, and this is mutual and reciprocal. With the notion of ecosophy and the ecosophic object. So the term ecosophic object is a paradox, I have to say. So there is no such thing as the ecosophic object. But what it alludes to is the idea that anything we make as architects, anything that we conventionally, traditionally called object, if embodied in that thing is something of an ecosophic principle, if we understand that it has a three-way correspondence between human relations, the environment, and human subjectivity, then maybe it drops its objective condition and becomes an ecosophic project. And I think we can easily understand the term human relations. We understand what that means. We can understand even the environment in conventional terms. But human subjectivity, I understand this in India is a particularly even more complicated issue than it is in the West. But in the West, when we talk of human subjectivity, Freud has given us a legacy that is difficult to shake off. So we are always talking about the I. The I. Egology is ruling everything. I am the center of all things. Now, I understand in Indian philosophy that also is the case, but it's not Freudian. It's something different. But what this chap Felix Guattari tells us is that maybe we focus less on the I and more on the idea that we together develop the I in each other. So our I is already a composite valuation of the many. And this is called intersubjectivity. So intersubjectivity is some principle. So the projects that we work on are always between subjectivities. The projects we develop are always about developing not just one project, but a whole series of projects. And thirdly, Michel Serres, the parasite. The parasite in the West is a pejorative term. Anybody that feeds off anybody else without giving back is called a parasite, and this is a negative term. However, Michel Serres goes on to suggest, but we are all parasites. The human condition is parasite. We parasite off the earth, and everything in that series of relations on the earth is parasitic in relation. So what if we were to use this as a philosophical principle? That's what Michel Serres talks about. So he gives us three understandings of the para. So one is a feeding off, as in the action of a parasite, and it includes the symbiotic model. But, as I suggested, it radicalizes that idea into the idea of the community of parasites. And if you were to go to science, Science is really not very far advanced in the study of parasites. You'll get the study of individual parasites, but the chain of parasites, the community of parasitism, science knows next to nothing about. So we don't know the consequence of removing one parasite from the chain. We kind of know something. We know, for example, if all the bees die out, then humans die out quite rapidly afterwards. So the point is that we're quite early on in the studies of that. The scientists are doing a lot of work on that, and we have to follow suit. But another philosophical notion of the para is the idea of like the paradigm, the paradigma. So this is a notion of sitting alongside something. So we promote the idea that we're all sitting alongside each other. Everything sits alongside other things. We're trying to avoid aggressive politics of opposition. There is no need to oppose. This is a standoff condition, but if we just accept that things sit alongside other things, then maybe in time, the positive influence from those things that work best actually start to take on the power, the potency for most of the people, most of the conditions. And of course then, thinking about this in Western political terms, it's a deliberate inversion of Marx's idea of use value. So para also means strange, abnormal, and this is an encouragement, an inducement to move away from the idea of presupposing uses and that which is necessary, and accepting that actually there is room for that which we don't know yet to be necessary. So the necessary can come after. We can determine what is necessary after the event. Okay, so that was 3 ways into the notion of ecosophy. Now I'm going to give you 3 ways into theories of urbanism, which are important. I'm going to start with Patrick Geddes. Patrick Geddes, I hope, is important to you. Hopefully you know him. Coming from the University of Edinburgh, he's quite important to us, although hardly anybody talks about him, would you believe? But he is the father of town planning. You may know he came to India. You may know that he learned an awful lot from India. His principles are as much about biology as they are about society and sociology. But he's the foundation stone for Western urban planning. And he's invoked to this day more within planning than he is within architecture. So I want to take a moment or two to elaborate this diagram, which is the notation of life diagram. And we call this the theory of evolutionary urbanism, and it starts in the top left. So here we have the town, and on the top right we have the city, and it's taking its influence from Eastern philosophy. So we have work in this top corner. So work is a key reason for us living together. It originates the town, if you like. We work together and we form a town, and we cooperate. We find it necessary, because we know how to work that land and how to live together, we better set up some schools, because a school is the way of making sure this town works properly. We educate. You know? Now, before we have a city, which is here, we have this other square. And this is the university, in simple terms. This is what Geddes calls the space of the cloister. This is where lots of curious thinking goes on. This is the square of the unnecessary. You know? This is where I, as both a practitioner of architecture, urban design, urban planning, but also in the academy, I have the luxury to sit in here, and I can advise the town how best to be a city. And once we operate that, we can develop ourselves a city based on all the right kind of things that cities do properly. But the important thing about this diagram is that it recognizes that we get it wrong, that the way it works isn't always right. And if we get it wrong, we have to go back to square one. We have to think of the town, we have to think of work, we have to think of school, we have to think of education, higher education, the place of ideas, of culture, of art, of religion. All of these things sit in here, and then we can reappraise the city. So this is constantly working. What I think is important about this is this square here. We have many, many, many cities in the world. We even have cities springing up in many places in the world. For example, China. I know that India's got its own ideas on developing big cities, but they don't even have a town first. They're going straight to square 4 without going through that whole apparatus. And they don't seem necessarily to be learning about this cycle. So I think this is a worrying sign, but I think this diagram therefore becomes important even to look at our existing cities. And when I move on to the second and third example of urbanism, I have this first one in mind. So this is a diagram produced by Andrea Branzi. So he was around in the 60s and 70s in Italy. He was part of the Italian radicals. And he's in that post-68 situation in Europe where he's thinking, how on earth do we get any movement in practice here? When in developing his theories of no-stop city, he's saying, well, everything is being commodified. Architecture has been commodified, the city's been commodified. So he had this notion that architecture can out-commodify the commodities, and design is this amazingly ambitious, objective thing which presents itself as a value yet to be understood as a value, but really presents itself as a commodity, as something that appears to be very valuable. And he has this idea that the city is this endless network of all sorts of things with these events, these actions of commodification and exchange. Now, in more recent times, he's keeping this going ever so slightly, but he's got a slightly different idea called the weak metropolis. And the weak metropolis accepts that this diagram still exists, but at the center of everything is this IT network. Everybody has a computer, everybody has the potential to make their own production. So the city is as dynamic, perhaps more dynamic now than it was in the 60s and 70s, and there is greater potential for individual, small, micro practice and micro freedoms, for them all to aggregate and create something which is a slightly different practice to the city. And so he gives us this possibility that the city is an aggregation of enzymatic territories. He's using this, again, a biological metaphor, where actually certain things in the city are what actually start to determine what goes on in the city and creates the city. And he suggests that cohabitation is half agricultural and half urban in its territorial practice. So I want to move quickly on to then this diagram of Unger's, Koolhaas, and others. The green Berlin as a green archipelago. Now we talk about this as polycentric urbanism. Why this is kind of quite interesting, I think, is because it's looking at Berlin at a time when it was a shrinking city, so population is moving out, and it's creating all these holes, these pockets, these emptinesses within the city. And even looking at Mumbai, there are lots of pockets in Mumbai, there are lots of holes in Mumbai. Now, of course, the developers, the real estate makers want to build on the margin, want to reclaim even more land, want to build their peninsula and put roads on the outside and other things on the outside so that you're even further from this amazing environmental provider of the sea. And it's therefore going to create even more pockets within, because they're going to be displacing all sorts of communities from everywhere else. Anyway, so learning from Berlin, what these architects proposed at the time is that these can become green centers. And actually, I'm taking it one further and going back to Brandsey and going back to GIDC and suggesting that these are actually productive sites, sites of production, sites of, you know, if one was to look at Mumbai prior to its fast economic development of the 1960s and beyond, there was a lot of green space, a lot of amazing fecund landscape, and it could easily still be that. When you walk around that city and you see the trees bursting up through the hard stuff, you can see that if you turned your back on Mumbai for 6 months, it'd be overtaken by plants. And I think, actually, to a certain extent, that would be a really positive thing to happen. So, I'm now into the final part of the presentation. Is this going too long? Is that okay? So this is maybe 10, 15 minutes. So I just want to show you some of the projects. Every cross on this map of Mumbai is a site of micro-social practices that we've initiated as projects, as academic projects, not in practice. And each of them has authors. Each of them has multiple sites. These are just maybe one of the sites that they take on. And they're all operating to this ambition of ecosophic urbanism. And we call this Parasituation Mumbai. It, as I said, operates alongside the development plan. It doesn't say this is wrong. It just says it's not quite enough by itself. So perhaps we're going to, this is just one section of the development plan, but it's very typical of a development plan, a local plan. It zones things off and it imagines that that's what's going to happen in reality. And of course, what we know is it never happens like that in reality. Developers, real estate agents, people come along and they change it. And when you get to, that's the center of the edge of the fort area. So that's the tidy part of Mumbai, Bombay. When you get to the northern parts and the southern parts, you see that it starts to be even sketchy. Anyway, so this is the cover of a book that has been appropriated by the Bombay project. We produced this book last year, 2 years ago in fact, and this diagram operates as the chain of parasitism. Yeah? So every color is a micropolitic, a micro project, and every color is one of these projects. Yeah? And these are all the authors. So in our work in Bombay, we have over 40 practitioners, 40 people working in the studio. So these are 40 students, and there are 4 other authors, myself, Kevin, who's sitting here, so I just pointed out with this pointer, Chris French and Paul Pattinson. These are all the tutors of this studio, but we're not so much tutors as collaborators and co-practitioners, and we get involved in all of these projects. And they all have titles, or they have what we call an agency. So we could substitute any of these terms and put it where that X is, and we could say, for example, the Maidan, so the agency Maidan, and Maidan work. So there are projects which try to see Maidans as a way of thinking of work, or agronomy, so agency agronomy and agronomy work, or housing and amenities work and the agency, etc. So all of these. So, and they all have their different outputs and practices and methods and methodologies, and each one of these is another film, like I showed you at the beginning. And what you've got to imagine is showing all those films simultaneously. But you know, that cacophony or that polyphony is nothing as complicated as a city anyway. But maybe you can imagine that actually it's maybe more like a city than the plan, the development plan that I just showed you. It's perhaps gets us closer to that idea of the city than a development plan. And in our practices, in our presentations, in our exhibitions, in our theatres of production, we have found that the people who understand us most clearly are not those that are locked into the professions, but those actually everyday people, the people who live in the city, maybe have other disciplines in the city, other interests in the city, and it's curious how they just love these kind of drawings, even if they don't understand them, but they understand something of the sensibility at work, the care at work, which is more than what they can say for those very bureaucratic kinds of drawing, those very bureaucratic kinds of output, which really distance the dwellers of the city. So, Bombay then, beautiful city, really, because it's a beautiful landscape. It's a beautiful landscape, it's a beautiful environment. Yes, I know that it's kind of harsh at times and there are very complicated, difficult social things to look at, especially if you're the likes of us coming from elsewhere, where we're not used to seeing a lot of the things we see, smelling a lot of the things we're smelling. We know that Bombay is an assault on the senses, but we're not here proposing solutions for Bombay. Actually, we're looking at Bombay, trying to understand what we can learn about our own practices, and recording Bombay in our terms so that we can maybe learn something that is specific to Bombay, something that Bombay can teach us, India can teach us. We have been thinking about coming to Ahmedabad. This is another one of the reasons I'm here, because I'm interested in Ahmedabad, especially the mills, the old mill culture, and the mills as guilds. And I know they no longer exist, but I think there's something really still powerful in those histories, and the same exists obviously for Bombay. So we like these drawings because this is the British coming to Bombay and thinking, what on earth have we got? Absolutely we don't know, but we better get our best cartographers onto it. And of course, these tend to be geographers and sailors, and what they realize is that everything is shifting, the ground is shifting, the mud is moving everywhere. We better have the most precise maps so that we can get in and out of Bombay safely, because this is the gateway to our new economic world of cotton, etc. And so they produce these amazing maps, but what they record, accidentally I think, is something of the amazing fluidity of that landscape. Bombay is an estuary, you know. So Dilip Dakuna, I don't know if you know Dilip and Anuruddha Mehta, who teach at Penn in America. They've done the project SOAK. Well, they've also come to our studio in Edinburgh. So we like their attitude towards thinking of the ground and water. And a lot of that, excusing the pun, seeps into our work too. So we love this image because it can't lie. Look at what's happening around here. Look how flat this is. It could easily flow up here. The Maidan are stunning. That was an old edge of Bombay, beautiful edge. We can see just about the other edge here, as it once was. And, you know, architecture, urban design is nothing but the design of edges. Space flows, it's everywhere. All we do is put stuff down and it interferes with space. So perhaps if we were more articulate with our edgings and understanding that what we do is we put something in the way of spatial flow, then maybe we could actually design in such a way where those flows continue to flow, or maybe even encouraged to flow in ways which are conducive to the way both we would like them to flow, but perhaps how they naturally flow anyway. So I'm going to skip through two projects very briefly, just to give you some idea of the variety of themes, and then I'll concentrate on one, but maybe just one aspect of one, so you can see something of the kind of drawings that we do. As I said, there are also films that are on the go, but I couldn't show you all those films, otherwise you would just get bored watching the films. So I want to show you that we do an awful lot of drawing work, an awful lot of creative output, stuff which talks about territory, space, architecture, urban design in slightly different ways. So remembering we're only dealing with micro things, but we have to look at the macro scale too. So we have the space of Bombay in its totality. So you say, what these drawings are looking at, this is looking at the principles of Ayurveda, would you believe? So it's trying to record rhythms, it's trying to record rituals, it's selecting a few by which it can anchor its thinking and its practice. So it's thinking of the coming and goings of the flamingos, for example. So the flamingos are coming to Bombay again because the algae is in great production, because of something of the chemical factories, ironically. But what's happening is the flamingos are eating the algae and they're getting mercury poison and they're all going to die soon, so they'll go again. So there's something important about understanding those rhythms, those rituals, and making sure that our rhythms and rituals are cooperating alongside these situations. So with all those chai drinking rituals, those tea growing rituals, the first cut, the second cut, etc., etc., these are drawings which try to put a new kind of cartography together that holds those spatialities. And you see it kind of goes from this scale to this scale to this scale to this scale. So architecture and urban design is in there, and it has consequence, but it might restrict itself to one piece of this and hope that it can expand into bigger programs here, here, and here. And it works as much that way as it does this way. So those rhythms and rituals and their flows have to be drawn and recorded. This is Suri Fort. I don't know if you know this. It talks about ground conditions. It talks about wet bits, dry bits. It has got the mangoes and the flamingos in mind. So it develops architectural thinking, architectural language, programmatic practice, technological practice, from the growing of tea to the production of tea, etc., etc. And of course, formal practices. We are architects and urban designers. There's another project which is looking at Maho Creek. Now this is again another very typical thing that we see in Bombay, and it's not different from many places in the world where you have great big industries. Here are the mangroves. And here are almost, one might say, illogically, massive dwellings. And these dwellings are built to accommodate people who once lived in Juhu. And they're quite unpopular. But there's also a fishing community here. But as much as you have this one, you have this. So there are many of these in Bombay. And this is a project that tries to deal with lots of different issues. It reconciles the dwellings of these big towers with the fishing areas, producing amenities, reconsidering the whole landscape of both where the towers are and the landscape in front of the towers, reconsidering this through some parametric projection. Looking at the planting of particular flowers which actually remove some of the chemicals that are produced by the chemical works. So as well as producing biomedical factories, it creates fields for growing the flowers. And it's developed to quite a complex degree in construction and figuration terms. And as I said, this is one of a series of 40 authorial projects, and they're all informing each other, and they're all as para-situations to each other. And so this is one I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. So this is a project that takes place, that's proposed for the cotton mills, Cotton Green. It initiates itself from this image. The white, it's an image taken from satellite photography, and the red is oxygen producing, and the white is not oxygen producing. It's very simple. the urban planning produces no oxygen. The natural condition, which once was all of that edge of Bombay, produces lots of oxygen. So you can see there's an oxygen issue in Bombay. But there's an oxygen issue in all our cities, especially the bigger cities. China is recognized as one of the biggest pollutants of urban smog. And perhaps it seems obvious that they can look to these kind of diagrams and offer some solution. And I'm trying to remind us back to this green archipelago of Ungars and Koolhaas, and try to say, well, isn't it quite obvious what we need to do is put some of that red into the white? Yes. So that's what this project is about. It's about putting red into the white. But it has to go through another process, I'm afraid, which complicates matters, which is that actually this drawing here puts that non-oxygen producing as green, which is, in semantic terms, quite difficult to talk about, red being ecological and green being non-ecological, but if you can try and get your head around that, that's quite important. And the white, if you like, becomes a neutral syntax of architecture. The conceit is that actually we are the producers of white, but wouldn't it be interesting if that white could also produce red? Therefore, going from the green to the red. So that's what this project tries to do. So if you see, the project goes from the green spectrum to the red spectrum at every syntactical level, at every programmatic level and programmatic disposition. So we're looking at particularly cotton green, which is here, and it's trying to bring some of this red down into this most intensely non-oxygen producing area, which is there. So from, north is this end and south is this end, so from the mangroves to cotton green, so from the red to the white. And so here's a couple of images to keep in mind something of the urban design conceit here. So this is how Bombay really is. And this is how Bombay really is to a certain extent, or could be, if we see that what this stands for is an architecture that is not antithetical to this, but is sympathetic to this. So can we get something of this red moving into the white? And everything that we see around here, could it be more oxygen producing and less oxygen depleting? So this is the cotton green cotton exchange building. And this is just a set of diagrams. It's green at the moment. Can we make it red? And the project that we're going to focus on looks at this area just in here. So some of the productions we make, so we're looking at the model of that area. So this is a model of all of that. But we're going to focus on, that's the cotton exchange there. We're going to look at these, just that area there and there. But these are speculations of how to bring the red into the white. And we're looking at essentially that area and a little area there. And we have an agronomy centre and a chemical works, the agronomy centre and the chemical works. And they're operating as much as building as landscape. So the landscape that you're looking at here and the buildings in this diagram are not differentiated, because landscape is architecture, architecture is landscape, landscape is urban design is landscape. If we accept those terms, we don't get into this silly idea that the landscape is something natural and architecture is something unnatural. We're all trying to be part of the same parasitic processes. So this is, we're going to look first at, a point before I go on. I just want to make out, it's important that we declare that we're designers, architectural designers, yeah? So we have no fear about taking our projects into architectural detail, because we work from the scale of the body to the scale of the building to the scale of a series of buildings, to the scale of the landscape in general, and back again. Yeah? So everything is ecosophic urbanism. And what you're highlighting on this drawing in the gold color are particular parts of the architecture which are oxygen producing, actually. These are very clearly articulated places, things to do with ventilation, heating, and so on and so forth. So the project here is the agronomy centre, and the project here is the chemical works. So we're going to look first at the chemical works. This is the layout of the plan. And you can see that it involves a whole array of programs, minor programs with major programs, and it cultivates this landscape. It grows flowers, it grows plants which remove the chemicals. The chemicals get captured in the plants and recycled and sold as chemicals. And it's worked out to quite a sophisticated level. The agronomy centre does the same, except it's operating from, sorry, this is still the same project. It kind of shows you that if we just take one of these, there is a detailed gradation. If the existing ground condition is that contaminated green, and we want to filter it up through the architecture to become as close to red as possible. And we can do this through working in very detailed terms through program and construction and so on and so forth. So I don't want to elaborate too much on that because it would be another lecture in itself, but I just want to make sure that you understand the point that this is one of 40 authorships which goes into this level of detail and back out to the macro landscape. This is the agronomy centre. It's got the same complex series of multiple productions, sites of production. These are producing the seeds which are going to grow, treating the seeds, creating a seed bank and reciprocal with the chemical works. And the way these are seen, you might think these are far-fetched projects for Bombay, but these are the kinds of things which go on just on the business parks of Cambridge in the UK. These are the kind of high-tech research companies. There's lots of money in this. These are not pie-in-the-sky economic projects. These projects get lots of funding from private commerce, but also state commerce, because they are important to how we produce food. And one thing that we can all agree on, without food, we have no cities. So these kind of research practices are fundamentally important. And rather than placing them on the outskirts of the city, why aren't they actually in the cities where people work, people live, in these green areas that you can create oxygen through? And they're sophisticated in all ways. And if we can train our economic principles to fund these projects, as well as all the other projects, then perhaps you gradually get to that point where, as Geddes might say, we move back from city to town, to school, to university, back to city again. And as you can see, these projects are environmentally articulated, sensitive. They understand how Bombay is this place of where the buildings are in a constant state of disrepair. And I think it's because that monsoon climate requires construction to be considered for that climate. And so they're trying to investigate new technology, new techniques of building within a monsoon, within a tropical climate, an architecture that is not simply an architecture that would be built in Cambridge or Milan or New York or Texas, but something which is appropriate to its landscape. And so that image, coming back to it again, is to remind us that, we are makers of artifice, but we have to cooperate with the lungs of nature, and together they could maybe work more productively, more ecosophically, and the kind of urbanism that comes from that is highly principled And just to remind us what those 10 points are, and this is, I'm finishing on this. So ecosophic urbanism works as an agency of skilled design practice. Ecosophic urbanism places design practice at the heart of urban planning. The local plan is as a result of local practices with an international outlook. Ecosophic urbanism develops infrastructures from within and between ecologies. Ecosophic urbanism does not consider ecology to be the domain of a nature-loving minority. Ecology is an ecosophic principle for all dwelling, the foundation of economy. It develops multiple sites of production, new microsocial and micropolitical practices, and develops and encourages new solidarities. And ecosophic urbanism develops a new gentleness. It's a new aesthetic and new analytic practice, proposes and develops processes of heterogenesis rather than projects that conform to the same formal principles. It considers heterology as appropriate as homology, with difference and change holding sway in a standoff. And finally, ecosophic urbanism develops ways, many ways, heterologies to enable the singular, the exceptional and rare to coexist with a state structure, whilst encouraging the state structure to be the least burdensome as possible. So, thank you very much. Does Kevin have any questions?
It's not so much a question as to go back to a point we were discussing over breakfast this morning, which is this idea of much of what we do in the studio operates at a level which could be described by people who are unfamiliar with it as being a kind of idealism. It's important to reinforce the idea that what we're trying to do is an architecture that can not only work alongside the forces of global economy, but also be robust and act in a robust nature for the communities which it proposes to sit within and alongside. So it's important to, I think it's important to maybe talk about how the project or ecosophic urbanism acts in this way, acts as a kind of new fort, if you like, to go back to those visits we've been doing in Mumbai over the last few days to the original forts, the original colonial forts in Mumbai, and how that they very cleverly position themselves to both look out and look in, and operate in a way that protects their environment, their immediate environment. And it's not really a question, it's more raising an issue that we were talking about this morning, which is this isn't just an idealism of a kind of new kind of ecological architecture. It's something that needs to find a way, or find ways to be robust within its urban environment, in what's quite a toxic urban environment in many cases.
I'll take that as a point, not a question.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
It's interesting to see the analysis what you are looking at Mumbai city. But there are two questions which come to me. Is Mumbai, when it began, was a series of islands and a community structure which was talking about one ecology. And what was forced was another story of the urban structure formation, it brought different ecologies, which also brought another structure, which is where half the Mumbai's population is living in poverty. And it's another ecological structure. What you've shown is the paradigm of the white surface versus the natural structure and trying to balance it in some way to reach sustainable. But how do you look at this question of what was there existing, was it important, and what has come now today as a new structure of poverty? Is how do you look, because what you're showing is to go backwards a little bit to achieve an equilibrium, which cities have forced themselves to one side of the equations, and it's creating all the problem of, and you want to balance that.
Yeah.
But in the case of Mumbai, I see that we have erased one ecology and laid a structure which is creating another ecology. And some of the old is still existing and suffering. Some of the fishing communities are still.
Yes.
Whereas the new community of the slums is also suffering. So how do you see that structural change, which I don't know whether you're looking at that kind of...
Sure, yeah. Okay, thank you for that question. I think it's an important question. I'm going to try and answer it by referring to a lecture we attended in Bombay a few nights ago at the offices of Studio X, where they had two local academic practitioner activists speaking about these very issues. And I can't remember the names now. So one is Anita, and another is Gotham. I don't know if these names are familiar to you, but anyway, essentially they were promoting a position that operates from an understanding of the politics of a city, that understand there are these communities, these real concrete conditions where people like me have got no use whatsoever, because the reality is some of these communities are being bulldozed there and then. So Anita in particular was looking into those issues, and he is there on site and forming processes and procedures by which that they can form some sort of resistance to those displacement practices, but at the same time coming up with academic arguments, academic theories, academic productions that start to take on the state apparatus that's perhaps behind an awful lot of this kind of action. So I think that's really important work. On the other hand, there was Gotham, who was really operating much more academically, and he's calling upon, just as I am to a certain extent, European philosophy, political philosophy, particularly Henri Lefebvre, and reminding us that we have three strands to the city. You have three apparatuses of value, Lefebvre calls it. So you have the apparatus of commerce, of commodification of capital. You have the apparatus of governance. Then you have the apparatus of society. And of course, what is being promoted is that the apparatus of society somehow that grows, and we develop means by which to inflate that aspect, and this in itself offers resistance to the other two, and we want the third to grow and the other to diminish somewhat. So again, I agree totally with that, and then what I produce doesn't deal with that. But the important thing that I do, I think we do, we have no pretense whatsoever of being either top down or bottom up. Whether I like it or not, I am utterly bourgeois. I come from a very privileged situation. But one thing that I do, I am a designer, I'm a skilled designer. I have gone through all sorts of amazing educations, and I know quite a bit, and I'm actually really good at certain things. And it seems to me that it's a shame that this stuff that we conventionally put forward as some sort of boutique, commodified, exclusive, stylish apparatus is commodified to an extent that it's unpurchasable by the everyday situation. So I'm sort of saying, in parallel, in a para situation to Gotham and Anita, I think people like us, ethically, socially, ecologically, ecosophically responsible people like us can offer this stuff, this thinking, these procedures, these methods, these methodologies, really as a kind of discourse in its own right. I don't see that it can lead directly to anything, but I think it can indirectly operate and lead to maybe a lot of things, and maybe alongside Gotham and Anita, maybe the kind of stuff we do actually gives some alternative visioning, and the vision isn't left entirely to the master planners who want everybody else to be the slaves who follow their plans. And I think we are desperately trying to do that. So thankfully I feel equipped to converse with Gotham, to converse with Anita, but to converse also with the same people that they're conversing with, but with a different mediation, I don't want to deny the power of aesthetics or the power of the politicization of aesthetics, but I want to open it up in a slightly different way to newly aestheticize, to aestheticize not as an elite practice, but as an ordinary practice that I hope gathers some sort of consent, but not totally, because that'd be terrible. We don't want the homology of what we're doing. We want all of these differences. So the methodology that I'm promoting deliberately involves multiple authorship, multiple disciplines, and the more the better. And that's kind of what we're trying. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a way of trying to understand it. So I appreciate all those issues that you're talking about, and I couldn't possibly begin to understand. I've only been in India now for 2 years. Crossing the road is still a nightmare. And thankfully, I'm still crossing the road okay, getting there, getting to my destination. And as we were talking earlier, Sarah, it works. It's amazing, it works. I get across the road. It's crazy. There's no way that Britain would tolerate this, no way that Germany would tolerate this, no way that many of the European countries would tolerate this. But it's not entirely horrible, you know. Some of it's kind of amazing. You know, I don't want to fetishize it or anything. I'm not one of the people that will fetishize the slums, for example. I couldn't offer a better critique of the slums than the people who are here doing that kind of thing. I don't want to do that. I want to show it what we do, and hopefully, as I said, it has something to offer. And as I said, I don't see us ultimately being practitioners in India. I want to know what's going on in India. I want to pay attention to India. I think India is in a very special position. I'm not sure what that position is. I'm gradually feeling my way around it, but I want it to be a really important place. I want it to be a really important contributor to the discourse on the city. And it's got things here that I think we can all learn by. You know, our European cities are as much in crisis as any city in any part of the world. So I'm just broadening my education and using my education as some sort of offering to others. I hope that's okay. That's fine. We could. Any more? Wait.
Anyone else have any more questions?
Is it intimidating? A little. Maybe can I conclude with one thing?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So, a bit of marketing on behalf of University of Edinburgh. I don't really mean it that way, but I would say it in some ways that I hope is acceptable. I teach in the Graduate School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at University of Edinburgh. I run 4 postgraduate programs, and I'm about to take on yet another, a 5th, but they're all of different durations. So the PhD program, the 2 years master's program, the 1 year master's program, and I've got 2 1-year master's programs. In fact, I've got 3. In fact, I've got 5 programs I'm running. I'm taking on a 6th, and I'm just about to take on with Kevin a summer school. So next summer is going to be the first postgraduate summer school in Edinburgh. Certainly in the College of Humanities and Social Science, certainly the first in architecture. Now, why am I speaking about this? Because I think it's really important to understand what a postgraduate education is, and also that postgraduate can have different durations. So throughout all of that presentation, I hope you understood there was something of a thesis at play. Right? These are all design-led theses, but it's theses nonetheless. There's a discourse that is embedded within a drawing, if you like. But I think you can do drawings that take 3 weeks. You can do drawings that take 1 semester. You can do drawings that take 2 semesters, 4 semesters, or 6 semesters plus, if you do PhD by design. So I'm trying to point out that there's a different kind of thetic thinking and thetic practice that we engage in at the University of Edinburgh, and it's open to all for application, and I hope I encourage you to apply. But maybe the other point I'm trying to make here is that both Kevin and I also have practices. We run offices. I do urban design projects. I do design projects. And that same principle applies. The 3-week, the 1 semester, the 2 semester, but the design of cities. Cities are ongoing, and I'd maybe reflect back to that GIDCian model. It's cyclical, it's evolutionary. There's no such thing as a static city. So the fact that we don't have any practical output for this work isn't a problem to us. The practical, as it were, is to document it, and there'll be a book published, and I'll send copies of the book, and you can use it to keep a window open, a door open if you like, but the point is it's going to be recorded, and I hope at least some people will read it. So anyway, I would love to have applicants from CEPT to the University of Edinburgh. Our MSc in Architectural and Urban Design, and we've got 12 of those students in Bombay at the moment, and 3 Masters of Architecture students in Bombay. I have 400 applicants per year to that program. I take 15. But I really want more Indian students to apply. I get maybe 20, 30 Indian students, and it's very rare that we can make offers, I'm afraid, but I would love to find a good quality applicant from here. I think it's important to our work. It's important to the international procedure of education as exchange for that to happen. And hopefully some of our students will come here. So anyway, I'll end on that. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorian, for accepting our invitation, coming, and I hope our urban design student did take good care of you in the morning. It's a customary in Indian tradition that we always honor a speaker, and I welcome one of the urban design students to perform that ceremony. Take it out from the wrap.
Thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful.
First of all, I must thank all of you for coming. As a part of FAAA talks, we want to have at least one talk every 2 months. And most of you are from master's program. I think in another 6 months, you are going to become alumni. So you can understand the importance of alumni getting engaged into this type of talks. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and if you have any questions or any information you want, you can definitely pass on to FAAA office and we'll forward it to Dr. Dorian. Thank you for coming. Thank you.